Welcome to God Connection. What if I told you that the quiet fury rising within the person attempting to manipulate you is not about you at all? What if their frantic, desperate efforts to keep you trapped in their web of uncertainty are truly the latter stages of a parasitic personality that cannot exist without your energy? You, chosen one, were never merely a participant in their game. You occupied the whole field. They constructed their fortress of control on your self-doubt. And now that you're realizing your own divine power, it's crumbling. The most horrifying thing for a puppeteer is a puppet that recognizes the strings, knows the stage mechanics, and calmly chooses to rip itself free while smiling at the audience. They believed they were directing a play, but you were taking a master class in their own dysfunction. What you're about to hear will not only verify every gut instinct you've ever had, but it will also serve as heavenly proof that your awakening is more than just a dream. It is their unraveling. Stay with me because we're going to analyze the anatomy of their terror, and you'll see that you were never the crazy one. You were the one about to be free. 1. You became a codebreaker in their prison of confusion. This is the reality that burns them from the inside out. They built an elaborate, high-walled prison of psychological confusion, and you learned how to read the blueprints while you were still trapped within. The typical time frame for their victims is brutal. The deception is discovered in the rearview mirror, long after the emotional damage has subsided. It's viewed through the haze of a breakdown, the pain of a deep betrayal, or the tiredness of a total spiritual collapse. That is the result they are counting on. They methodically plot for their victims to awaken after the battle has been lost. However, you, Anointed One, are an outlier that they did not account for. You awoke mid-ceremony. The pieces were still moving on their beautifully prepared chessboard. The air was still heavy with their enchantments, but a sliver of heavenly light shone through the fog in your head. You did not have to physically leave the room to view the exits. You sat at their table, consumed their poison with a knowing calm, and started to discern the pattern. This is what rocked them to the core. Their whole approach was based on your bewilderment. They gambled everything on the fact that you would be too emotionally entangled, too blinded by a devotion they never earned, too strangled by a trust they constantly exploited, or just too spiritually tired to ever question the story they were feeding you. The screenplay they crafted for you was straightforward. Cooperate, collapse, and then bear the crushing weight of guilt created just for you. That was the endgame. Instead, you became a mute spectator in your own life. While under the great strain of their reality, you started to connect the dots they had worked so hard to scatter throughout your mental landscape. The minute your eyes met theirs, not with rage, but with terrifyingly calm and all-seeing clarity, the power in the room switched completely. They saw it as a shift in air pressure. Suddenly, their well-prepared passive-aggressive barbs, which were formerly their sharpest weapons, started to bounce off your newly acquired spiritual armor. Their hallmark silent treatments, which were intended to plunge you into a frenzy of self-blame, turned out to be periods of welcome calm and meditation. The unseen song they played, which had previously provided the beat for your frenzied dance of apologies and appeasement, ceased functioning because your soul had finally, thankfully, snapped into its sovereign position. Once that heavenly click occurs, it cannot be unwound. You didn't simply observe the trap, you grasped its design. You understood the cyclical nature of their love and brutality. You identified the patterns of their psychological bait and switch. You got the startling and scary awareness that their conduct was not just moody, damaged, or complicated. It was ruthlessly purposeful. They were following a screenplay, a prepared playbook, whose core subject was not love, connection, or collaboration. It was total, suffocating control. And here's the wonderful twist that they'll never get. You didn't have to yell, confront, or expose them with a theatrical speech to make them disintegrate. Your quiet and powerful awareness begins to exert enormous pressure, and they are suddenly the ones who felt trapped. They are the ones on edge, feeling exposed, noticed, and horribly off balance. Your silence became a perfect mirror, and they were horrified to see the deformed, desperate monster reflected back. Their wrath stems from more than simply the fact that you caught on. It's because you realized too early, before they could get all they wanted from you, before the harm was irrevocable, and before they could say the ultimate, soul-crushing word. Now, you are the unknown variable in their lives, and the scary question that keeps them up at night is, what will they do with what they know? That uncertainty is a type of misery they created for others, and they are compelled to experience it themselves. 2. You recalibrated mid-battle instead of reacting. What is driving them insane is the fact that you fundamentally disrupted their system by refusing to respond in the manner they had methodically prepared. They are experts of stagecraft, creating the ideal environment for emotional pandemonium. They examined your psyche to locate the triggers, lured you with precision, and constantly pressed your most sensitive buttons, all with the sole intention of eliciting a tremendous emotional eruption. They were waiting for the breakdown, the tears, the shouting match, a dramatic, messy reaction that they could catch, film, and then point to as irrefutable evidence for themselves and others, saying, "See, I told you they were the unstable one. I told you they were the problem." But you denied them their reward. You refused to take the major role in their tragedy. You recalibrated rather than responding, which was considerably more powerful and terrible. You radically rewired your perception of the scenario right there, in the midst of their simulated conflict, in real time. This wasn't simply a shift in strategy. It was a total system update that made their previous program outdated. They were intimately acquainted with the previous version of you, the one who would ceaselessly explain and over-explain, apologize for wounds caused, and devote infinite energy to repairing what they were purposefully and repeatedly damaging. That version of you was in their comfort zone. It made manipulation simple, gaslighting effective, and control predictable. But somewhere in the spinning vortex of their most recent catastrophe, you became quiet. This was not the stillness of defeat or surrender. It was the concentrated, buzzing stillness of a mind honing itself into a sword. You weren't broken, you were digesting, integrating, and growing at a rapid pace. And when you emerged from that quiet, you were not the same person who had entered. You did not return to discuss the specifics. You did not return to defend your reputation from their false charges. You no longer sought for clarification or affirmation, which they were never going to provide. You just viewed the game board, understood the setup for what it was, and calmly and firmly regained your energy. This is more than simply a sign of emotional development. It's a significant spiritual boost. You altered your aim. You were no longer attempting to win the debate. You were battling to reclaim your tranquility. And at that very instant, the power dynamic was irreversibly ruptured. Now they're wriggling in pain because they can't figure you out. The open book they formerly read with easily is now written in a language they can't understand. They hurl their strongest shade, and you don't even flinch. They use their weapon of silence, expecting you to collapse, but you stay calm and unconcerned, relishing the solitude. They twist the story into a pretzel of falsehoods, and you simply and gracefully withdraw from the debate entirely. This scares them since it means the game is finished, and they have lost by default. You are no longer under pressure to perform. It's on them. Because when you stopped giving them the emotional response they desired, they were forced to face the naked horror of their own actions without your drama to mask it. They are now forced to sit alone with the cold, harsh reality that their grip over you has ended. And without control, their whole identity, which is based on the manipulation of others, starts to crumble. They grossly misjudged how strong and terrifying full self-awareness is. They mistook your voice for the principal danger. But the fact is that what you did was much more devastatingly strong than anything you said. It was the intentional choice you took in the midst of the conflict to defend your own precious serenity rather than perform for their constant dysfunction. That was the moment the world shifted, and they knew it in their bones. 3. They were addicted to a version of you who was asleep. Let's say something they'd never say out loud. They weren't in love with you. They were hooked to a version of you who hadn't yet realized your own potential. They were profoundly linked to and reliant on the version of you that frequently questioned your own instincts. The you who overextended your energies, apologized for your presence, and over-explained your emotions. You were taught to see the best in everyone, even when mountains of evidence told you otherwise. That version of you was a manipulator's dream, flexible, controlled, and eager to please. They centered their whole feeling of comfort, power, and stability on the sleeping version of you. However, that individual is no longer alive. They did not just quit, they ceased to exist. You did not just develop, you had a seismic awakening. A switch flicked within your spirit, and the light that emerged lit everything. You stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt and began giving yourself the undeniable advantage of the truth. And that single commitment to your own truth altered the whole course of your existence. You stopped watching the minor dramas they made up to distract you. You stopped believing the manufactured tales they used to preserve their victim status. You began asking the difficult questions that they had spent years convincing you were too terrified to ask, particularly the most hazardous one. Why am I still choosing to tolerate this? That psychological upheaval not only threw them off balance, but it also broke their worldview. Because their addiction was never to your love, but to your lack of limits. Your unwavering allegiance was not appreciated. Rather, it was used to help their manipulation go more smoothly. Your natural gentleness and compassion were not seen as assets, but rather as holes that allowed them to dominate and control. However, now that you have began the holy process of selecting yourself, they experience a deep feeling of abandonment. This is the greatest fallacy, since it was never your heavenly responsibility to bear their emotional burdens or manage their fragile egos in the first place. They are actually crying about the loss of access. They grieve the version of you that accepted their relentless disrespect while calling it love. The version that would quiet yours needs to maintain their fabricated tranquility. The version that enabled them to rewrite history on a daily basis while remaining optimistic. That version of you made people feel strong, important, and in command. This new, awakened version of you leaves them feeling completely and terrifyingly exposed. They overlook the flaw in your commitment. They miss the emotional freedom they no longer enjoy. They overlook how simple it was to plant seeds of uncertainty in your head. Above all, they miss the heady sensation of being in charge of another person. That emotion is no longer with them. You developed beyond the shell of the person they were feeding off of. You outgrown the restricted, degrading part they assigned you in their sad, repetitious play. And they can't influence anything they can't reach. So, obviously, they're unhappy. But let's be clear, their rage has nothing to do with your transformation. It all comes down to you recognizing yourself as the amazing, strong entity you are. You're no longer performing the role they created for you. You are now living in your divine truth, which is the one plot surprise they weren't expecting. For you become self-certified when they attempted to invalidate you. Their whole manipulative framework is based on a single, fundamental assumption: your self-doubt. That was the main key to your soul. If they could effectively make you doubt your own memories, question your gut instincts, doubt your actions, and invalidate your own feelings, they could control the whole story of your life. Their effort was not necessarily an all-out attack. It was often a death by 1,000 cuts. It was disguised in the subtle, oblique remarks that undermined your confidence. It was hidden under backhanded remarks that seemed like praise but made you feel insignificant. It was in the continual, subtle, "Are you sure about that?" questioning that were meant to make you doubt your own sanity, even when you knew deep down that you were correct. They required your trust to be unstable. They needed you to have doubts about yourself. They required your inner voice, your heavenly compass, to remain quiet and unreliable. Because as long as you required them to interpret your own reality, to tell you who you were and how you felt, they would always be in power. This is the manipulator's primary operating system. They don't always have to use physical force or outright aggressiveness to defeat you. They favor the longer, more subtle process of gradually undermining your sense of self, piece by painful piece, until you are utterly reliant on them to comprehend your own reality. But the version of you who asked for permission to exist is a ghost. The version that continuously apologized for your own emotions. The one that pleaded for clarification only to be greeted with further gaslighting has been shed like an old skin. You've stopped delegating your self-worth to those who never had the divine authority to define it. You stopped looking for affirmation from those who, from the start, were profoundly concerned about your potential and progress. Your confidence is no longer built on the shaky foundation of their praises and judgments. It is made in the flames of your own understanding. You got self-certified. You began to think of your intuition as heavenly insight rather than a transitory experience. You grew to rely on what you knew rather than what you felt. And that tremendous upheaval shook their grip on you totally. Because without your self-doubt as a handle, they have nothing to hold on to. There are no more emotional levers they can pull. There are no more insecure gaps through which they may smuggle their poison. They can no longer take advantage of the misunderstanding. They resent the fact that they can no longer guilt-trip you into submission. They despise the fact that you no longer leap to defend yourself against every bogus charge or hurry to repair the same things they purposefully wrecked. They are furious that you may now leave their turmoil in perfect peace without having to protect it. That is what is eating away at them. Not only did you get stronger, but you also grew self-sufficient. You no longer need to be told who you are. Your confidence now comes straight from the source. It is internal, steadfast, and does not respond to their desires. This makes you essentially unshakable in their view. Once you understand who you are on a soul level, their techniques become apparent, sloppy, and completely useless. They may keep attempting the same old techniques, but the spell is irrevocably shattered, and they are aware of it. 5. You saw the calculation behind the charisma. Initially, their charm was a bright light. It felt so genuine, warm, and real. They were masters of their profession, knowing just what to say, how to smile, and how to exhibit just enough vulnerability to entice you into their circle without raising suspicions. The praises they showered on you felt like warm sunlight. The inside jokes established an immediate, delicious familiarity, and the carefully selected anecdotes they gave about their history made you feel especially special, as if they were finally revealing their genuine self to you. However, as time passed, a subtle but persistent sense of wrongness started to set in. You couldn't explain it at first, but your soul, your inner knowing, detected a significant and troubling gap between the words they uttered and the energy they radiated. You came to a terrifying realization. They weren't being honest, they were calculating. That raw vulnerability you felt was so courageous and genuine. It was a staged performance, a selected and deliberate giving of information with the goal of gaining a key footing in your mind and heart rather than forming an authentic relationship. It was all a well-planned performance. Their attractiveness was the outfit, their devotion was the lure, and once they had your confidence, their true plan started to unravel. What threw their whole strategy off course was that you didn't stay dazzled by the stunning surface-level performance. You have a discerning spirit and have paid close attention. You began to discover irrefutable trends. You saw how their overflowing love and generosity nearly always appeared when they wanted anything from you. You noticed that the deluge of accolades was often followed by a show of control or a subtle put-down. You gradually realized that their so-called deep conversations were not about mutual bonding at all, but rather data-gathering missions, intelligence operations to uncover your vulnerabilities, anxieties, and wants, all of which would be cataloged and used against you later on. You saw through the glittering veneer of charm to see the cold, ruthless calculating underneath. This makes you very hazardous to them, not because you are violent or vindictive, but because you see them for what they are. You have progressed beyond the first stages of their manipulation. You no longer confuse charm with character. You can no longer confuse a compelling act for true genuineness. You can now see the difference with crystal clarity, and it's a bell they'll never unring. They are now palpably uneasy around you because they know you are no longer impressed by their facade. When they rehearse their emotional breakdowns, you don't show pity. You no longer believe their phony, histrionic apologies or their sudden, miraculous moments of growth when they realize you are finally breaking away for good. You've seen the exhausted, insecure guy behind the curtain, and the whole illusion of Oz's greatness and power has faded. They can sense the change in your vibe. They can feel the calm, constant awareness in your presence, which severely disturbs them because they know, in the part of themselves they conceal from the public, that they have lost complete control of the story. You can see them now, not the carefully crafted avatar they showed to the public, but the true, calculating operator they were frantically attempting to conceal. Nothing scares a manipulator more than someone who can see the difference between sincerity and strategy. If the knowledge in this message resonates with your spirit, it indicates that you are part of a wider awakening. This is more than simply a channel. It is a community of beings like yourself who are rediscovering their spiritual potential. Take a minute to subscribe to God Connection and become a part of this spiritual warrior community. And if this ministry is giving you the clarity and strength you need on your path, consider planting a seed of appreciation. A $10 gift using this super thanks button below this video is a powerful way to support our work, enabling us to develop more material like this and reach out to those who are still trapped in the dark. Your donation helps to keep this beacon of light blazing brightly. 6. You disarm them by refusing to participate in their psychological Olympics. They want a response above everything else. This was the fuel for their engine. Every petty barb, every backhanded praise that made you feel tiny, every guilt trip intended to bind you to their will, and every deliberate silent treatment was part of a greater strategy. Every step they took was deliberately planned to get you trapped in an endless emotional competition. They badly wanted to lure you into a condition of constant self-defense, to keep you demonstrating your value, or to have you work even harder to regain their elusive favor. It was never about love. It was about leverage. You spent some time playing the game, not because you were weak or stupid, but because you had a pure heart. You really believed you could make the relationship work. You did not see their acts as a planned game. Rather, you saw them as regrettable miscommunications, unpleasant confrontations, or challenging misunderstandings that could be resolved with enough love and patience. But, eventually, your soul had had enough. You just stopped engaging. You gave up attempting to communicate your reality to someone who has previously shown to misrepresent it. You stopped accepting invites to their dramas, which were usually veiled as important conversations. You stopped leaping through the fiery hoops that they kept raising higher and higher. You made a deep realization. Their purpose was never clarity or resolution. It was always and only about control. The moment you removed your energy from their competitive ring, their whole approach imploded in on itself. They were unable to manage your newfound tranquility. Your quiet was no longer a weapon against you. Rather, it served as a protection. Your unwillingness to compete was not a sign of weakness. It was the ultimate power maneuver. You weren't ignoring them. You were gradually undermining their whole universe. Mind games are parasitic in nature. They can only function if there is a host on the other end to feed the tension and provide the emotional energy they need. Once you decided not to compete, they were left on stage with no one to perform for. There's no audience to legitimize them, and no power source to deplete. That's when raw terror kicked in. Because, without your response as a buffer, they were forced to sit alone and gaze at their own reflection. The stage they had painstakingly set for you to disintegrate had abruptly turned into a bright spotlight on their own destructive conduct. And they despised what the light showed. They were not willing to confront the horror of their own manipulation without your help to excuse it or your tears to distract them. You ended their twisted show, leaving them adrift in the deeply unpleasant stillness that comes when a game is revealed, yet no one wants to participate anymore. They keep attempting to elicit something, anything from you, but you have advanced. You don't flinch when they use their freezing cold shoulder. You don't rush in to mend something they've purposefully sabotaged. You don't lose any sleep over their views, which you now realize are based on a desperate desire for control. That, more than any debate or conflict, was what eventually shattered their grip. You did not win by out-arguing them or playing a better game. You won by not showing up for the match. You restored your precious peace, forcing them to finally face themselves. And it is the one encounter for which they were completely unprepared. 7. You did not just survive the gaslighting. You reverse-engineered it. This is one of your most significant accomplishments. You not only survived their continuous campaign of gaslighting, but you also understood its essence. They sincerely felt they could twist your reality into such a warped knot that you would no longer be able to recognize what was true. That was the aim. They intended to progressively undermine your sanity, making you question your own recollection, disbelieve your strongest instincts, and doubt your own thinking. Every deception they uttered was delivered with the unwavering assurance of an experienced con artist. Each rejection was a deliberate move on their chessboard. They'd modify the tale from minute to minute and then look at you with fake sympathy, as if you were the one who was forgetful, emotional, or crazy. It was a gradual, subtle unraveling aimed to turn you against your most important asset, yourself. But you refused to be confused. You become a spiritual detective in your own life. You began taking precise mental notes. You started to detect the tiny indications and patterns in their dishonesty. You watched how their account of previous events would miraculously morph and rearrange itself when they were forced into a logical corner. You witnessed how they brilliantly avoided any and all responsibility by deftly redirecting every problem back to you. You picked up on their rhythm. They would employ overpowering charm when they detected you backing away, and they would expertly play the victim card when their control began to slip. You viewed the complete mosaic, not just individual tiles from the pattern. You didn't just fall apart. You mentally put their whole system together. You effectively reversed their manipulation. You now have the template for their methods. You worked out their timing, understood their deceptive language, and pinpointed the exact triggers they liked to exploit. You stopped absorbing their guilt and began gathering your proof. And no, this was not always tangible proof. It was spiritual proof. They tried so hard to stifle your intuition, but it got sharper and more accurate than ever. Your discernment, which they attempted to describe as paranoia, became louder and more emphatic. You had reached the stage where you no longer need their apology or confession to verify your own reality. You knew, if this message from God connection has touched your soul, do not keep it to yourself. Allow it to echo. Like this video if it resonated with your path. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these statements resonated with you the most. I read them all. Share this video with someone you know who is becoming aware of their own power. You never know who your sharing will assist to liberate. To continue getting this spiritual sustenance and affirmation, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Finally, if this ministry gives you strength, please consider sponsoring our efforts. Your support enables us to continue developing content and reaching out to those in need. A $10 gift using this super thanks button below the video is a great way to support our effort. We are no longer simply surviving. We are flourishing together in terms of spiritual knowledge, emotional clarity, and divine power. Let us keep ascending. God bless you.